Hello and welcome to episode 59 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. It has been many months since I have sat in front of this microphone and talked. I am out of practice. I am out of sorts. I don't know about anybody else, but it's been a tough couple of months. I never intended to stop releasing episodes, but man, I got broadsided by this COVID-19 thing, as I'm sure many of you did, and I have been putting one foot in front of the other. I've been in survival mode for many months, as I'm sure many of you are. If this is your first episode of Crash and Ride is normally a podcast where I talk to musicians about anxiety, depression, and addiction and other mental health issues and how people got through it and what their lives were like, what happened, what their lives are like now. I've got 58 episodes out already, and it's been really good. Mental health has been on my mind a lot, as I'm sure it has been on a lot of your minds these last few months. I'm a touring musician by trade and a podcaster as a hobby. I was scheduled to go out to South by Southwest with two bands, a power pop band from Athens, Georgia called 5/8 that I've played with for 30 years now, and a Japanese rock band from Tokyo called Pinky Doodle Poodle that I've played with for a couple of years. Neither of those bands has played a show since about March 11th. Haven't had any practices. Really haven't left the house much except to go to the grocery store and to go out and work in the garden. So I'm going to be straight up with you and say I've been struggling with some depression, some anxiety, and sadness. I miss you people. I miss traveling. I miss eating in restaurants. I miss band practice. And at this point, there's no end in sight. So I'm hoping I'll be listening back to this episode at some point and be thinking, man, that was a bleak time. I'm so glad that's over. As I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Some of us have gotten back to work. I know a bunch of musicians who are working other jobs right now, some of which are like customer service jobs where they're dealing with people in restaurants and bars, retail establishments, and I hope that people are wearing masks. I hope that you're taking care of yourself. I hope your customers aren't being shitty. I hope you're hanging in there. I have been mostly spending time with my daughter. And I have an enormous garden. If you're friends with me on Facebook or you follow the social media pages of the podcast, I put up a couple of garden pictures, but really I've just been in survival mode. Taking care of the garden and preserving all the food that I get from it, putting green beans and tomatoes in big glass jars and pressure canning them, stick them in the pantry. That's what I've been doing. And playing guitar at night and dreaming about a day where we can all get together in big rooms and play loud rock and roll. This week's episode is not an interview. If you're a longtime listener of the show, you know that oftentimes I do these song explications where I dig deep into a song that I love and talk about it from end to end. And this week's song is Revolution Blues by Neil Young. It's been on my mind a lot lately. We'll get into all of that in a minute. But first, I want to read this. Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available if you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home, on stage, in the studio, or in your living room. Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your favorite music retailer today. I talked to Nick Greer today. Nick, of course, is the founder and owner of the company, Greer Electronics, and, we've been friends a long time, and when I told him I was doing a podcast about mental health and musicians, he said, let me know how I can help, and that's how he became a sponsor. Today is July 3rd, 2020. The last few weeks, the country and the world have been rocked by protest of the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department. and a lot of people have offered opinions on social media. Perhaps no one with more gusto and lack of self-awareness than a man named Mike Fuller, who runs a company called Full Tone, which is another pedal manufacturer. They make a pedal called the OCD. And Mike Fuller said some racist, stupid things on social media. Of course, this is not Nick's opinion, it's mine. But I can tell you this, the Greer Electronics Little Samson is a better replacement for the OCD than you're going to find anywhere. The Little Samson is not currently in production, but can be found used on eBay or on reverb.com. It's a great sounding pedal, nice treble, mid-high boost, great sounding pedal. And if you were thinking of getting your OCD off your pedal board, you could do a lot worse than Little Samson. It's the right thing to do. And Nick's the guy you want to support, as opposed to someone maybe you don't want to give your money because he's a dick. I mean, hey, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown, and I'm out of fucks to give, so that's exactly how I feel. If you wanted to go with something that was currently in production, the Southland pedal by Greer Amplifications, also a fine sounding pedal with a nice mid boost that could make your OCD obsolete. You can give that OCD to maybe a girls or boys rock camp and stop repping a company run by an old dude who's out of touch and, doesn't need your money. These are, of course, my opinions. These are not the official opinions of Greer Amplification or Nick Greer as a person. Nick and I have not personally discussed much about Mike Fuller, but I do know Nick's pedals backwards and forwards, and that's what I'd recommend. Crash and Ride is also brought to you by Jittery Joe's, a micro coffee roaster here in Athens, Georgia. They have a special espresso blend named after this podcast. You can get Crash and Ride espresso from Hendershot's Coffee. You can get it from the Jittery Joe's website, but I got to tell you, my friend Seth Hendershot, who runs Hendershot's Coffee, is also selling his 2 signature blends off his website. Seth is a good guy, and of course, with the shutdown we're experiencing, his business is down, but he's still doing mail order coffee. He's being super careful about it. He's wearing a mask and gloves when he packs every can that he sends out. So go to the Hendershot's website at hendershotsathens.com. That's HenderShotsAthens.com and order Crash and Ride espresso from him, or get one of his signature blends, the 78 or 33 RPM blends, and help support a really great local business here in Athens, Georgia. All right, so, I've had a couple of false starts on episodes in this gap where I haven't really been putting out episodes. I did early in all of this, like 2 or 3 weeks in, I did a call around where I talked to people who were experiencing the shutdown, who were past guests, and had some good conversations. And my friend Jake Nelson killed himself right before all this went down, and I had some stuff in the can talking to friends and family of Jake, and then I just fell in a hole, man. And I just been outside working in the dirt, making food happen, and touching base with some of my friends who've been on the show, and staying in touch with the guys in 5/8 because we've been together for so long. We're like a family. And I really appreciate everybody who's reached out. I really appreciate everybody who hasn't yanked their monthly contribution from the Patreon. I'm gonna try to get this thing rolling again. Can't make any promises. I, like most of you, have like days where I just wander around in a daze. My executive function seems to be really limited, and then I can start 50 things and finish 3 of them most days, and then I have super productive days, and like then days where just nothing happens, and we've never been here before. It's all kind of a mystery. I did, like, last week I did drive up to Atlanta for kind of an audition session, a recording studio situation with an old friend who's starting a new project and really wanted me to be involved. And I listened to the songs, and I really liked the songs, and I was really sort of jazzed. And then I just couldn't get my head around it. Like, I had real trouble focusing on learning the material, and then when I got up there, I was not clicking. There's a guy, he's found this amazing guitar player who I would love to play with, but my head wasn't in it. And then the second day I was getting ready to drive up, and I was like, I got to give this 100%. And was really struggling, and my daughter caught me on the way out the door in tears, and she was like, please don't go to Atlanta. There's coronavirus in Atlanta. I'm worried you're going to die. And I told her, baby, everybody involved in this session has been really aggressively socially isolating and staying out of the public and sort of saving all their interactions so that they could have this one interaction, and everybody's going to be super safe. And yet I could tell that didn't mollify her in any way. And it was a lot of anxiety for her, which was really unnecessary. And that whole situation didn't work out. I hope they find a drummer who can kind of be present and be there. But there's people who are planning their post quarantine lives, and I'm like stuffing vegetables in the pantry in case the economy collapses. I don't know about you, but I'm just putting one foot in front of the other. In the meantime, though, I kind of revisited Revolution Blues because like a year ago, a guy who owns a great bar here called the Nowhere Bar was like, I would love for 5/8 to do this song. And I kind of gave it a cursory listen. On the Beach is a funny Neil Young record because it was recorded after Tonight's the Night came out. And which is interesting because it was released before Tonight's the Night was released, and I think that was partly due to the fact that Neil Young, even in 1974, was already kind of confounding label expectations. One of the early reviews for On the Beach said, hold on, let me see if I can dig it up here. Rolling Stone described it as one of the most despairing albums of the decade, which is kind of interesting because Tonight's the Night came out like a year later and was even darker and even more full of despair. Tonight's the Night, of course, was written after the death of one of Neil's crew guys who he was super close to. Needle and the Damage Done, of course, is written about that death. And this record came after that, and it was really kind of, Neil was in this weird place. He didn't tour on this record. He didn't tour until Tonight's the Night came out, and then he refused to do any of the songs from Harvest. Harvest had come out when Neil had written Harvest when he was 24 years old. It turned the world upside down and had a couple of huge hits on it, and then Neil just kind of was hitting the studio here and there with different people, and like the personnel notes on the record kind of indicate that, and so this record kind of wasn't a smash hit like Harvest, and it had a weird release history too. It was originally released in July of 1974. Didn't sell 1 million copies, or what did it sell? Let me look that up real quick. How many copies did it eventually sell? Yeah, okay, so Harvest sells 4 million copies in the United States alone. And On the Beach only sold 500,000 total. So the record eventually goes out of vinyl production in the early 80s and was only briefly available on cassette, according to Songfacts, and was available on 8-track cartridge. Of course, many of you people may not remember 8-track tapes. That's a whole other weird 70s artifact. I remember I had a copy of Animals by Pink Floyd on 8-track, and right in the middle of Dogs, I think, it would like fade out, and then the tape would go ka-chunk, and then it would fade back in. And 8-track sucked. They sounded okay, as I recall, but then again, I was mostly stoned. So, along with 3 other mid-period Neil Young records, according to Songfacts, On the Beach had been withheld from re-release until 2003. Then 5,000 fans signed it like an online petition to release On the Beach, and it was finally released on CD by Reprise Records later in 2003. So that is why, if you're wondering, like, why don't I know this Revolution Blues song when I know all these other Neil Young songs, or why don't I know, like, one of the greatest Neil Young songs of all time, of course, is For the Turnstiles, which is on this record, but you may not know it if you're not like a hardcore Neil Young fan like me or most of the people I've played with, because the record just wasn't out there. And, of course, as soon as you mention Neil Young, someone's like, oh, let's put on Harvest, or or Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, or Live Rust, which was the record that was my introduction to Neil Young, because it has so many great songs from the Rust Never Sleeps tour. And so this one might have slipped past you, but I think that For the Turnstiles, like I mentioned, is maybe one of the great Neil Young songs of all time. And Revolution Blues is fairly important. The personnel on the song is another thing that's really interesting about it. Of course, Neil plays lead guitar and sings. Ben Keith is playing Wurlitzer electric piano. Of course, Ben Keith is a famous multi-instrumentalist who was on a bunch of Neil's stuff and could play just about anything. David Crosby is on rhythm guitar on this, and he was not into this song when Neil was writing it for reasons I'll get into in a minute. Rick Danko, bass player from the band, is on bass. I have a great Rick Danko story that I will tell you in person sometime, or hit me up via text, and I'll tell you all about it. But Rick was sort of famously a pretty hard partier. He died after a tour with the band. He returned home to Marblehead, New York, where he was from, laid down to go to sleep, and never got up again. He was 55 years old. The drummer on this session is one of my favorite drummers of all time, Levon Helm, also, of course, from the band. And he is doing the Levon thing for sure on this track. And that guy makes a song lope in the warmest and most interesting way. And this is a great song, and part of it is because of the great personnel on it. As I mentioned before, this song was recorded after Tonight's the Night. And the reason that it came out before Tonight's the Night is because Neil turned in Tonight's the Night, which was just this howling record full of despair at the loss of a dear friend, and Reprise rejected it. And so Neil started this record in February of 1974 at Broken Arrow Studios in San Francisco. And what's funny is that, like, what seems like a fairly short recording cycle to us now, it was tracked between February 6th of 1974 and April 7th, and was done. And then, of course, mixed at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles, and was released later that year. Like, it was such a fast turnaround. But I think Reprise was really anxious to get a record out in the wake of the success of Harvest. And like I said, they rejected Tonight's the Night because they wanted another, Old Man and Heart of Gold and everything that was on Harvest. And Neil's just not that guy. So he ends up in the studio with David Crosby and some guys from the band, and they cut this track about Charles Manson. Charles Manson, of course, we all know as the man who founded the Manson family commune in the early 60s in Southern California. They would eventually go on to commit 9 murders in July and August of 1969. He would be convicted in 1971 of plotting those murders, and would then later die in prison in 2017. But he was around the music scene of Southern California in the 60s, and people knew him. He had handed demos off to Brian Wilson, if I recall correctly, and Neil Young had gone to Mo Austin at Reprise and said, hey, this guy's a great writer. He's a little erratic, which, of course, later turned out to be a huge understatement. But around music scenes, there are fringe characters, and of course, the 60s in Southern California, everything was pretty fringy, and at the time, it was super transgressive just to smoke weed, and a lot of the people in the sort of hippie scene in Southern California around Topanga Canyon and Laurel Canyon, they knew these folks. They knew all the women around the Manson family. A lot of them were really beautiful, and they were all super dedicated to Charlie, and Charlie would play guitar and at parties and do these songs. And as I've said many times, one of the things about drugs is it often puts you in the room with people that you would never be in a room with. And so Neil knew these folks, and David Crosby knew these folks, and Brian Wilson, and, the rest of the Beach Boys, and of course Neil's success would eventually lift him out of that scene, and he would end up in Northern California, kind of away from all that, but later would sort of revisit it on this album. On the Beach has a lot of real anger expressed in these sort of witty ways. Like, I mean, Neil fires back at Leonard Skinner in the first song on the record. I hear some people been talking me down, bring up my name, pass it around. They don't mention happy times. They do their thing. I'll do mine. Like, that's a pretty sharp barb coming in Walk On in response to, Leonard Skinner calling Neil out for Southern Man in their song Sweet Home Alabama. And there's some barbs at the Critics and Ambulance Blues and other songs. And I think Neil is very ambivalent about fame at this point. He's a little angry at Reprise for rejecting a record that he worked very hard on and was very heartfelt. And but also, like, I think Charles Manson kind of stands in as a bit of an avatar for Neil's discomfort with suddenly being wealthy and suddenly being like privileged, but also in the way that Neil is great at expressing ambivalence. And one of the reasons that I think he's one of my favorite writers of all time is he's real ambivalent about the dude at the edge of the scene who feels like he knows what you should do for the revolution, man. And we'll get into more of that later, because I feel like there's a lot of ambiguity and ambivalency here about being a rock star at a time when the country is absolutely in turmoil, not unlike the country we're living in right now. But let's jump into the music. So the song is built around this riff that is an A sus3 to A minor. Neil is sort of a master at building songs around these very minor chordal deviations, and this song starts with A to A sus3 to A minor, like this. So it starts with a kind of an open A and then hammer on to the A sus3. This is A sus3, A minor. And that is the groove for most of the song. Oh, it just occurred to me. This is your first song explication by me. I'm a drummer who plays at guitar. So yeah, I got my Telecaster here. That's my approximation of Neil Young's rhythm part. And then of course, Levon comes in with a fucking perfect Levon fill. Levon Helm's drum sound is so perfect. And I doubt he hauled his drums all the way to Broken Arrow Studios to cut this track. It's probably just a set of drums that was there, but somehow it always sounds like Levon playing when Levon's playing, and it's this kind of muddy, swampy groove, and he just sets it down behind that rhythm guitar part in the intro and rides it. Then Neil comes in with the first verse of lyrics, which are well, we live in a trailer at the edge of town. You never see us because we don't come around. And then the groove switches to this F chord that will serve as a sort of motif in this song for a shade of menace. And we get the lyrics. We got 25 rifles just to keep the population down. So this is our first sort of reference to Manson's violence and also the revolutionary violence that was underpinning a lot of the sort of late 60s post feel-good Haight-Ashbury thing that it was getting dark even before the Summer of Love and before Altamont.
Well, we live in a trailer at the edge of town. You never see us 'cause we don't come around. We got 25 rifles just to keep the population down.
So 25 rifles in one trailer is a lot of rifles. I don't know how many people are living there in the story, but like there's this implied like stockpiling of weapons. In the mid-60s, of course, Manson was already talking about revolution, but by the late 60s, the talk had gotten super dark, and he was headed in to this whole thing where he was going to start a race war. But that F chord sort of, you've got the groove, and So the A, even with the sus3, is kind of sunny, and then that F major against it, it creates a little note of darkness. So we get the sense that this character who's speaking in the song is pulling us further into bad decisions, and the F chord illustrates that. We get more of that in the next set of lyrics. So you be good to me, and I'll be good to you, and in this land of conditions, I'm not above suspicions. I won't attack you, but I won't back you.
But we need you now, and that's why I'm hanging around.
Oh, so there's two things I want to mention here. One is that we're introduced to this new chord, the E chord, which is further into darkness. Like we're going down the scale, pitch-wise, and it's not a good place. This character is trying to get Neil to go.
So you be good to me, and I'll be good to you. And in this land of conditions, I'm not above suspicion. I won't attack you, but I won't back.
Yeah, so that E chord comes after the F. And then it goes back, of course, to the A. So this song, I love the way it kind of rolls out, and it has a definite vibe around the musical decisions that are being made in it. And the other thing I want to mention is Rick Danko's crazy bass sound here. He's definitely playing flat wounds. When he was in the band, he was famous for playing an Ampeg scroll bass, which is this sort of violin body bass with this really elaborate headstock. If you get a chance to do a Google image search for Ampeg scroll bass. Super cool looking bass, and I think he's doing the Carol Kay thing where he's got some kind of cloth or sponge mute under the strings, and it ends up kind of sounding like a tuba almost. Here, listen. So I got my P bass here with flat wounds, and it definitely has a sound like very distinct. Super warm. But I think Rick Danko has gone a step further and done what Carol Kay, the famous bass player for the LA Session Group, the Wrecking Crew, used to do, which is to jam a sponge under the strings right up next to the bridge, so you get this really muted sound on this track, and I feel almost certain that's what you're hearing there, and it gives it this almost like military tuba Sousa march feel, this kind of loping boom 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 thing that I think sort of sets off this kind of faux military vibe that you're getting from this revolutionary character in the song. And I have to wonder if I won't attack you, but I won't back you is like a backhanded stab at Mo Austin for not releasing Tonight's the Night. Just a thought that maybe the correlation that Neil is making here is that the label is kind of like Charlie Manson in that here's what I need from you, but I'm not going to back you. Like, here's what I'm asking for the revolution, man, but like you don't give me what I want, you're on your own. The next verse starts with description of kind of this almost like flophouse situation where these guys are sleeping on the lawn. Well, it's so good to be here asleep on your lawn. Remember your guard dog? Well, I'm afraid that he's gone. That may have some deeper political meaning built into where Neil was at in 1974. I almost feel, though, like, I've had some experiences in communal living situations that didn't go so great, and there's a certain kind of dude who shows up who, I don't mean to discount the hippie thing because, my in-laws are this incredibly sweet Catholic hippies who raised my beautiful wife and are very pro-peace and very anti the taking of human life, and they live it. And I once made a sort of crack about hippies because as a punk rock dude, they're an easy target. But they were like, hey, we're hippies and we stopped the fucking war, didn't we? And it's like, yeah, you know what? You got a point. But also in the 90s, there were these guys that would often show up, at the dressing room of the club or at the big group house. And, they'd make themselves right at home. And in this situation, these revolutionary dudes are sleeping on Neil's lawn and they've killed his dog.
Well, it's so good to be here, sleep on your lawn. Remember your guard dog, but I'm afraid that he's gone. It was such a drag to hear him.
There's that menacing F chord again.
It was such a drag to hear him whining all night long.
Here's a sort of classic example of like a group living situation going wrong because someone found some aspect of something that was precious to you inconvenient and made it go away. And that's that moment where you think that this shit isn't working out, man. Yeah, so remember your guard dog. Well, I'm afraid that he's gone. It was such a drag to hear him whining all night long. And while the missing guard dog thing may be illustrative of some deeper thing, symbolic thing that happened in the 60s, to me it feels more like Neil's using it as a way of illustrating like these freeloaders on the lawn and they killed his dog. And, that's just like how dark and heavy these guys are, and also kind of how they're not really these free love spirits that they think of themselves as. Or maybe they just know that they're shitty and they're taking full advantage of everybody else's naivety. And that kind of thing is all through the book Helter Skelter, which is, of course, the sensational kind of pulp paperback that was written about the Manson, the Tate LaBianca murders and the Manson family and all that. But also Neil referenced it later on in an interview in 2008. He was talking about... I knew Charlie Manson. This is him speaking. I knew Charlie Manson. A few people were at this house on Sunset Boulevard, and the people were different. I don't know what it was. I was meeting them, and he was not a happy guy, but he seemed to have a hold on the girls. It was the ugly side of the Maharishi. Of course, the Maharishi yogi was sort of famous, the Beatles, sort of meditation guide and spirit guide who advocated free love. And this is the sort of darker side of that. And Neil goes on to say, there's one side of the light, nice flowers and white robes and everything, and then there's something that looks a lot like it, but just isn't it at all. And I think that this dog murder is sort of standing in for like, here's a guy asserting his needs ahead of everyone else's, full stop, including your attachment to your dog. But then contrast that with like, there's this verse about sort of poetic. Yes, that was me with the doves, setting them free near the factory where you built your computer love. Which to me is like, that is the language that these sort of like sociopathic or psychopathic people in positions of authority in these kind of culty situations in the 60s would use to kind of cover their kind of nefarious aims or desires. I hope you get the connection because I can't take the rejection. I won't deceive you. I just don't believe you, which is more about the duplicity of this Manson-like character in this song. I guess it's actually Charlie Manson in the song, but just kind of the contrast between the predatory behavior and the kind of like mystical bullshit that's used to cover it.
Yes, that was me with the doves, setting them free near the factory where to build your computer love. I hope you get the connection, cause I can't take the rejection. I won't deceive you, I just don't believe you.
And And there's the E chord as the song goes to one of the darker moments. And then we get a classic Neil Young guitar solo. It sounds like Les Paul clean through a Fender amp. There's a little Bigsby tremolo work. Kind of walks up nice and easy. First section doesn't really stray out of the A minor pentatonic scale, which makes perfect sense since we're working those A chords pretty hard in the main riff, and then we shift to the F chord. And then back to the A. This is kind of working like a jazz tune in that we're staying within the melodic structure of the song. Like this is a verse and a chorus, just like every other verse and a chorus, and he's just playing a solo over the top of it. I mentioned the Bigsby. That's the tailpiece tremolo bar. If you're not a guitar player or musician, you may not know what this is. It's a way of shifting the pitch or adding like a little trill vibrato, which you just heard back as it went back to the F chord. And so Neil Young has famously played this black Les Paul with a Bigsby on it. So that's why I think he's doing the solo here and not David Crosby. I did a little research just because I thought I might be talking about Old Black in this episode. That is the nickname for the 60s Les Paul that Neil Young plays with the Bigsby on it. And he received that guitar in 1968 in a trade with Jim Messina, the bass player from Buffalo Springfield. So it's probably the guitar he's playing in the studio here. Unfortunately, my guitar with the tremolo is at my luthier's right now, getting side dots installed, so I can't really demonstrate for people who don't play guitar or know that sound. I didn't plan well, but that's what the sort of vibrato that you hear in the solo is. It's that Bigsby probably. Of course, back to the E chord before the end of the solo and going back to the head of the tune, just like a jazz tune. Rick Danko is still hammering away on that flat wound bass, and it's got such a distinct sound. Flat wounds were kind of the default strings on all Fender basses up until the 70s, but most basses through the 60s when round wound strings were invented. Round wounds, of course, are kind of a more modern sound, less like an acoustic bass, but the flats you hear here are they're so integral to Rick Danko's sound. When I went to check the credits, I was not surprised at all to discover that was Rick Danko, and was kind of pleased to discover it was so distinctly him that it was actually him and not someone doing Rick Danko on the tune. There's a whole world inside the Rick Danko story that you might want to check out if you get a chance. A great jumping off point, of course, is The Last Waltz, the documentary, the Martin Scorsese documentary about the last show by the band. But also, you might want to check out the Jason Isbell penned Drive-By Truckers tune, Danko Manuel, which is a really great song about a really intense and troubled dude. And that's a great song, and I really like it. After the solo, we're at the penultimate verse. The lyrics are, well, I'm a barrel of laughs with my carbine on. I keep 'em hopping till my ammunition's gone. Of course, if you're not a gun person, you may not know that a carbine is a smaller configuration of a larger rifle. Like the M1 was the sort of battle rifle of World War II. Probably 40 inches long. The M1 carbine, like 34 inches long, and it would be the sort of exact rifle you would have if you were some sort of revolutionary, like a Black Panther or somebody in the mid 60s. Those rifles were pretty common, and they were everywhere, and because there were so many of them left over from World War II. And I keep them hopping until my ammunition's gone is, of course, a reference to that thing in the Old West where one desperado shoots at another person's foot sadistically to make him jump around, and that's an illustration of of Charlie Manson's character, or the character in this song that is an avatar of Charlie Manson. It's kind of a sadistic son of a bitch.
I'm a barrel of laughs with my carbine on. I keep them hopping till my ammunition's gone.
And then we get into some lyrics that I feel like might be the crux of the whole song. But I'm still not happy. I feel like there's something wrong. I got the revolution blues. And like, so I think that putting these words into Charlie Manson's mouth, or this sort of violent revolutionary character that Neil is portraying in this song, I think trying to undermine the sort of certainty of the kind of radical dude who would show up and need money from these, the rich hippies, who at this time would have been, Dylan, all the members of Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Neil Young, and would sort of be like, hey brother, this is for the revolution, and try to extort some emotional or material endorsement of the cause.
But I'm still not happy. I feel like there's something wrong.
This song kind of lives next to Revolution by the Beatles, which is a song that I loved when I was younger, but it's kind of come to bother me in a lot of ways. It's this kind of boomer thing where the endorsement of actual change is they fall short of, number one, addressing the actual underpinnings of the unrest that they're living in. Like Revolution is written by John Lennon, and it says we all want a revolution, but like we're going to divorce it from any kind of theoretical underpinnings or any kind of actual endorsement of any kind of reaction or way of fighting the arbitrary exercise of state power. So like Lennon specifically calls out people advocating for destruction or carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, but it seems like he would have probably been just as uncomfortable with pictures of Fidel Castro or any other revolutionary leader. And this is a complaint that I have with our current political moment. Like when you have a liberal movement that doesn't have any class analysis or theoretical underpinning, it just becomes about aesthetics. And like, you don't like Donald Trump because he's an asshole, is different than not liking Donald Trump because he acts as an agent of capital and is the sort of pointy tip of the spear of the billionaire class, making sure that the historically marginalized never have any say in their destiny, and are exterminated or marginalized to the point of being perpetually on a knife's edge of despair. But again, I don't think you can expect John Lennon to write a full-on broadside against capitalism and patriarchy because he was, after all, a white billionaire wife-beater. I do love the Beatles' music, and John's work is some of my favorite work, but I always feel like the song Revolution is just the ultimate, like, I'm into politics, but not that much kind of boomer anthem, and it irritates me. And I feel like in some ways, like, this particular part of Revolution Blues is not altogether inaccurate in as much as, like, it does call out the failure of the sort of revolutionary movement to catalyze into something human and to be sort of left to people like Charlie Manson, a just absolute psychopath, to kind of be like, those are the violent leftists. But also, like, because I think that generation chose wealthy celebrities to be their political avatars, political change became a matter of consumer choice as opposed to an actual, like, kind of work that you put in. And ultimately that led us to the 80s, and that laid the sort of economic underpinnings for the moment that we live in now. The last verse just ends up quoting things that apparently Charles Manson actually said. I see bloody fountains and 10 million dune buggies coming down the mountains. Charles Manson's plan was to start a race war with the Tate LaBianca murders and then build a white army to fight in the California deserts. And then there's this really interesting last bit. Well, I hear that Laurel Canyon is full of famous stars, but I hate them worse than lepers, and I'll kill them in their cars. I think this is Neil Young grappling with just his like visceral distaste for the violence and psychopathy evident in Charles Manson, and also just the sort of perfidiousness that he felt with the sort of hanger-on like Manson, like, I need money from you, I need emotional endorsement from you, and then this kind of like really passionate resentment of the material success of people like Neil Young, and this like almost Tourette's-like expression of a desire to cause harm to people like Neil Young.
I see bloody fountains and 10 million dune buggies coming down the mountain. Well, I hear that Laurel Canyon is full of famous stars, but I hate them worse than lepers, and I'll kill them in the car.
The song goes from there into this sort of extended instrumental jam, which I suspect went on for a very long time in the studio because everybody's playing so well. Levon and Danko continue to just like rock like the amazing and perfect rhythm section that they were, and Neil's laying down a really beautiful guitar solo, and it fades out like a lot of 60s and 70s tracks did, and ultimately I really love this song, even though there are moments where I want to grab it and shake it and go, what the fuck did you mean by that? But I mean, that's why I do these things, right? You know, ultimately, David Crosby told Neil he didn't want him to write this song as they were working on it. He said, man, that shit's not funny. And I think Neil was sort of grappling with a lot of stuff, with the relationship he had with his label, with the relationship he had with the 60s, and this song ultimately becomes an expression of that. So, you know, I guess David got over it because he played rhythm on the track and did a great job. And, the record eventually did come out. And as I mentioned before, it only sold 500,000 copies total, as opposed to the 4 million that Harvest sold, and was ultimately taken out of print for a while and then only reissued many years later. So I think that some of the ambivalence that we've talked about in the song carried from beginning to end in this project. So I think in a lot of ways it's a good song to have around right now, considering where everything is, right? All right, that's episode 59. It feels good to have gotten that out. It's been a long time coming, and that's good to be back. Hey, drop me a line. crashandride@protonmail.com is the email address of the show, and I'd love to hear from you. I want to know how you're doing. I'm going to start reaching out to people who've done the show before and check and see where they're at in their quarantine and see how their mental health is doing. I'm also going to have a show as soon as I can get it together with some resources for musicians to reach out and get mental health help, but also to get maybe some financial help. I know a bunch of us are struggling and wondering how we're going to just make it to the end of this, because, man, it's dark. I want to thank Gene Wolfolk and the band The Powder Room. The music that you hear at the beginning of the episode, the music that's under my voice right now, is from their album Curtains, which is available on their Bandcamp at thepowderroom.bandcamp.com. I also want to thank my friend Nick, who has never given up on the show and has several times reached out to me and said, hey man, how about another song explication? Nick, this one was for you, my man. I want to thank Jake Kreger. He's been the producer of the show pretty much de facto from the beginning. He was the first guest ever on the show, and he's always got show notes for me, and he helps make the show a lot better. So thank you for listening. Until we speak again, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Ask for help if you need it. As soon as we can, let's all go see live music together. Support your favorite band, and remember, loud guitars save lives.